Ain't even gonna watch this. Hello? Hello?
I'm leaving. How about you, Fernando?
Well, give it him if you're hungry.
You leaving after all that? Okay, it's recording.
Yeah, Katie just bought it for him.
Alright, let's go to expansion and reform.
Extension? I got it right here. I got it.
Everybody, you want to start on expansion and reform. Now, here's the reasons the political parties developed. Let's start. They had controversy over the Bank of the United States. We call this the National Bank. N-A-T-I-O-N, National Bank. Some people wanted a bank, some people did not. The next thing is called the Jay Treaty. I'm really sorry we can't go into it, but the Jay Treaty. Finally, there was some issues with France, and there was an undeclared war with France. It never was official, but some people were upset with France and how some of the early United States developed. From that, let's see. Who believed in a weak national government, who favored agricultural economic systems, and who supported farmers? We know that the first party was called the Democratic Republicans. Democratic Republicans. Next, questions 3 through 5 about the Louisiana Purchase. 1800. What happened in 1800? Well, the election of 1800 was the first, because remember, George Washington was the president at first, and he didn't have a political party. So this was the first time that there was a peaceful transfer of power. Transfer of power from one party to another. We know this because Thomas Jefferson won it. Thomas Jefferson became the president in 1800. Okay, we're going to flip to the next page. 1803. What doubled the size of the United States and extended from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains? We know that the United States looks something like this, all right? Well, the original United States was just here on the 13 colonies. With the purchase of the Louisiana Purchase, it doubled it. And this is called the Louisiana Purchase. Well, if I knew how to spell it, Louisiana Purchase. All right. Who is the woman in the picture above that served as a guide and translator for Lewis and Clark? So Lewis and Clark, these were two guys who were going west. They were exploring west. And there was a woman who helped them. There's a woman who helped the two guides, and you can see a picture of Lewis and Clark in the back. That's right, Sacagawea. Let me spell this: S-A-C-A-J-A-W-E-A. Sacagawea literally kept Lewis and Clark alive and helped them navigate west. Now, the last part of this is the causes of the War of 1812. We can see this on your answer guide, but this is British interference with American shipping and America's desire to expand west. So, did you know we went to war again with Britain? Because they were interfering, they were messing up our ships and our shipping, our trades, and we wanted to expand west. So we needed to get them out of the way. All right, next page. Analyze this political cartoon. What was the United States telling Europe? Well, this is a picture of, I believe, Germany, Spain. This was a picture of Britain, big fat guy, and this is Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam, USA, Uncle Sam, he's drawn a line, and this line spells the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine told Europe to stay on their side of the globe. Their side, really, their side hemisphere. America was basically telling Spain, Germany, Britain, and other countries, you stay on your side of the world. And you guys know the world is divided into really 4 hemispheres. But in this case, we're only going to focus on the Eastern Hemisphere and Western Hemisphere. And this is where the U.S. is. And we drew this line, imaginary line, we said, stay on your side. Cause, let's go. Madison's War Resolution. And right now we're doing cause and effect. Let's look at a cause and effect. The cause is Madison's War Resolution of 1812. And the effect is a federal response. The war resolution, his resolution to the war problem was to declare war. The Federalist response, these were the opposite guys. They wanted to oppose the war, and they talked of succeeding. This is not the same as success. This is secession, which means to split away. They were going to start their own country. Next, let's focus on Andrew Jackson, and he began giving jobs to some of his best friends, even his friends who were not qualified. We call this the spoils system. Do any of you have children, or do you know anybody, nieces and nephews, who's spoiled? They don't deserve more candy, but they keep getting it because they're spoiled. And we call this the spoil system. When Andrew Jackson, who's the white guy on the $20 bill, he began giving jobs to his friends, and that's called the spoil system. Now, let's look at the tariffs. Number 10, tariffs. There is a northern view and a southern view. Northern view is they favored them. The opposite is the Southern's view, who opposed them or disliked. And we know this because in the north there's factories, and in the south is agriculture where they're growing cash crops. Arnaldo, what were the 3 cash crops that we learned from before?
Tobacco, rice, and indigo.
Indigo. Good. All right, let's keep going. This is the 800-mile journey Native Americans, represented the arrows on the map, is referred to. So you see all these Native Americans, the Cherokee, the Seminoles, I can't even pronounce these, but they're all moving west because the president, Andrew Jackson, he was a very, very bad guy. Como el maje que está en la Casa Blanca ahorita. And he told all the Native Americans, go west, Salga. And we call this the Trail of Tears. Because the Native Americans They were crying. They're so sad. Okay? They're so sad. Next. Changes to the American parties in the Common Age. Changes to the American Party in the Common Age of the common man. Let's see. It's been a while since I've done that one. Now, I'm not going to write this because it's a lot. And you don't need to write it either. But I want you to know the answers right here. These are the 5 changes. Equality in the political process, only for white males. Increased voter participation, changing campaign styles. Rise in the sectional North versus South issues. Rise in the interest groups. Now this North versus South issues, this is bringing a lot of animosity, which will eventually lead to what war was between the North and the South? What war? Does anybody know? The Civil War. All right. We're not going to do this because it's a lot of writing. Disappearance of the Federalist Party leads to the creation of 2 new parties. So the Federalist Party disappeared, and then 2 new political parties came about it. These 2 parties were called the Whigs and the Know-Nothings. Now, let's briefly talk about the Texan independence and the Mexican-American War. Who remembers anything from that? Texan independence and the Mexican-American War. Americans were living in Texas and they began to revolt against Mexican rule. Because Texas used to be part of Mexico. And when there's white Americans that live there, they got upset, they wanted to move in, Mexico said no, and so then they got into a fight. American settlers moved into Texas, and that led to an American revolt against Mexican rule. Next page. It says, number 15 says, shade in the area of the map above the map above that the U.S. gained as a result of the Mexican-American War. Well, we know if Americans were living in Texas and we gained that area, not only did Texas become independent, but we also got all this. We gathered all this. California, New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, and Arizona, plus Texas, which for a little bit was its own country. Did you know Texas was its own country for a little bit? Next, this battle right here, you might see this picture. This is in San Antonio. The battle pictured in the Texans' fight. This was called the Battle of the Alamo, which is now a movie theater in Loudoun County. Now, we don't know the invention right here, but we know what it led to. The spread of the cotton kingdom. So something made cotton be produced more, and we know this is the cotton gin. It's a machine that made picking the seeds out of the cotton more quickly so it could be used for production purposes. All right, let's go here to manifest destiny and the belief that God wanted the United States to expand from the Atlantic Ocean to Pacific Ocean. Modes of transportation that moved settlers out west and saw the growth of the industrial economy. How did people get out west? How? Well, they didn't have a lot of paved streets, so they used railroads and they used canals. What's a canal? It's kind of like a small river that boats can go on. The territory of Florida was acquired by the U.S. from, now you hear that word, Florida, Flor, flower. And what language is that? Spanish. So it was acquired from Spain. We bought Florida from Spain. Okay, next, Civil War, Reconstruction. Is this helping?
Mhm.
Causes of the Civil War. Now, whatever this was, the effect is they repealed the Missouri Compromise, it was based on popular sovereignty, and it produced bloody violence. What was that? This was, and see, it repealed the Missouri Compromise, so it's not in Missouri. This is the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This produced a lot of violence. So if you see Kansas-Nebraska on the SOL, Kansas-Nebraska, fighting, blood, popular sovereignty, which means people choose. The author, Harriet Beecher Stowe, wrote a famous book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, can you tell me two slaves that revolted, that had an uprising? Can you tell me two slaves that had an uprising? I know one of them, but I can't remember the other one. The one I know is Nat, N-A-T, Turner. And the other one, which I just found, is Gabriel Prosser. P-R-O-S-S-E-R. And the abolitionist newspaper, which said slavery is bad, viewed slavery as violation of Christian principles. It was published by William Lloyd Garrison. This newspaper was called The Liberator. Just like we have the Washington Post, the New York Times, etc., etc. This newspaper was called The Liberator. Let's move on to the next page. Prior to the Civil War, states added to the Union, compromises struck in order, keeps a blank blank in Congress between free and slave states. You know, I don't know that one. I'm really sorry. I don't know this one. My apologies. Circle this. We'll come back to it. Now, right now, let's look at free states above this line. See this line? And slave states are going to be below this line. So all these are going to be slave once they're admitted, and all these, okay? And that's a north-south line. And the line, this is the map that we call the Missouri Compromise. And this is of 1820. Missouri Compromise of 1820. California was meant as a free state because you remember California, it goes from, you know, is that north or south? We don't know. So California wanted to choose to be a free state, and settlers in the southwestern territories, one from Mexico decided the slavery issue for themselves. Which act was this? There's a lot to remember. That's what we call the Compromise of 1850. Compromise of 1850. It's a lot. Compromise of 1820, Compromise of 1850. Now, this outrage, whatever this is, slaves can be brought into any state. Supreme Court rules that slaves are property. Now, this is really sad. But this is the Dred Scott case. Dred Scott case. Dred Scott was a slave. He was being brought from a slave state to a free state. Is he free? Something of that nature. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court ruled that slaves are property. And his name was Dred Scott. Now, this is 1850, and we're getting close to a fight between the North and the South. Presidential election of 1860. That's when Lincoln was elected president. Southern states fear that Lincoln will abolish slavery because Lincoln was from the North. He wanted to free the slaves. Southern states began to secede. That's the word that means leave. But you can also, so let's just put leave. But the word that will be on the SOL is secede. This pitted slave owners against Northerners who opposed returning escaped slaves. So, when slaves escaped to the North, Northern people did not want to force them back. There's actually a story about this called 12 Years a Slave, a movie. And this is called the Fugitive Slave Act. Fugitive means runaway, slave, who's running away, act. The mandate that put the Northerners and Southerners against each other. Fugitive Slave Act. Causes of the Civil War. All of this has really caused the North to be mad at the South and vice versa. Fort Sumter. What is the significance in the picture below? Fort Sumter, South Carolina. Who remembers that one? Fort Sumter was the first attack that started the Civil War. Okay? This attack started the Civil War. All right. You got that? Let's move. Freed slaves in the southern states. Goal of the war, destroy slavery. Told foreign governments to stay out of the war. That's a lot that's happening right there. And we know to free means to emancipate. Emancipation. And it's going to rhyme. And we needed to proclaim this, so it's proclamation. Proclaim turns into proclamation. Now, who was the general of the Army of Northern Virginia? But from Northern Virginia became the Union military commander. Then, who was the president of the Confederacy? Union. These are four different people. So this one right here is Robert Lee. I actually work at Robert E. Lee High School. This Union military commander was Grant. He's on the $50 bill. President of the Confederacy. This is Jefferson Davis. His first name was Jefferson. You might have heard of Jefferson Davis Highway. They're changing the name. And they're eventually going to change the name of Robert E. Lee High School. And let's see, Union president that insists that the Union be held together by force. That would have to be Lincoln. He wanted to keep the Union together. Now, Appomattox, if you've seen any, this is where the surrender of the Civil War. So we'll put end of Civil War. Here's a trivia question. Where was the end of the Revolutionary War? English versus American, British versus American. Where was that at? Yorktown.
Yeah.
Yorktown. Appomattox, Virginia. Yorktown, Virginia. Jamestown, Virginia. The best. All right. Okay. Which Civil War battle proved to be the turning point of the war? It's been a while since I did all this. Which Civil War battle proved to be? This is a battle of Gettysburg. Former runaway slave who became an abolitionist encouraged Lincoln to use former slaves to fight, and he eventually served as an ambassador to Haiti. This is Frederick Douglass. He's the man. This guy right here opposed secession, but didn't believe the Union should be held together by force, urged fellow Southerners to accept defeat and reunite as Americans. This was Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee. The ideas below were found in a speech given after the battle that proved to be the turning point of the Civil War. What's the turning point of the Civil War? We said it's Gettysburg. So you know what? The name of this speech was Gettysburg Address. To address the Battle of Gettysburg before it began. Description of a Civil War. Diaries and letters recorded harsh realities. Warfare often involved hand-to-hand combat. They had to live with permanent disabilities. And they returned home to find Southern homes were destroyed. So these are soldiers who wrote in the diaries, who did hand-to-hand combat. And so description of a Civil War, these are, what is it describing? It's describing and returned home to find Southern. It's really Confederate soldiers. Confederate soldiers wrote diaries and letters. They had hand-to-hand combat. They lived with permanent disabilities, like if their leg was blown off. They returned home to find their homes were destroyed. Okay. 15th Amendment. All you need to know is everybody's supposed to vote. Voting. But you know what? Women still couldn't vote. African Americans couldn't vote. They were supposed to, but they were denied. Now, the highlighted route on this map shows the completed Transcontinental Railroad, which brought settlers from the Mississippi River, there's the Mississippi River, and here's the railroad, to the Pacific Ocean. Here's the Pacific Ocean. The railroad was completed mostly by which group of immigrants? Well, over here, there's a country called China. China shipped immigrants over to California who helped build the railroad. So which group of immigrants? Chinese immigrants. Chinese immigrants, because remember, China is over here across the Pacific. Which circle the two regions that emerged with strong and growing industrial economies following the Civil War. Who had industrial. I talked about this earlier. Of course, the Northeast had a lot of factories, and also the Midwest. They're very closely connected. The Transcontinental Railroad, a lot of cattle was being brought here. That's where we get the Chicago Bulls from. These are the two areas. So circle Midwest and circle Northeast. Now, who was elected president after the Civil War? Who served mostly during Reconstruction? Who advocated and fought for the freedom of former slaves? Who urged radical Republicans?
Lincoln.
Well, actually, he died right at the end of the Civil War, like or a few days before, a few days after. So he was elected president before the Civil War. This guy was elected president after the Civil War, and he was there most of Reconstruction. This was Grant. Ulysses S. Grant. Remember, he was also the general for the North that fought. What amendment abolished slavery for the good of the United States? The 13th. The 13th Amendment. My plan for Reconstruction included the following ideas. The South should not be punished. Who didn't want to punish the South? This was Lincoln's plan. He was a kind person. He didn't want to punish them anymore. They already lost. Leave them alone. Southern cities that lay in ruins followed the war. Give me two cities that were crushed during the war. Two cities in the South. If you've ever been to the South, you might remember these.
North Carolina.
Well, there's lots of cities in North Carolina. Certainly, all of the South was messed up, was hurt. But even though this isn't in your packet, I do know the answer to this. The answer is Charleston. Charleston? Oh, I misspelled that one. Charleston. And Savannah, Georgia. All right, we are almost done with this section. Economic impact of the southern states. Blank, blank, and blank destroyed throughout the South. Wow. What was destroyed? What specifically was destroyed throughout the South? I'll tell you. It was farms, railroads, and factories. They're destroyed. What's worthless after the war? Well, remember, the Confederate States of America became its own country. When that country doesn't exist, the money doesn't exist. I remember El Salvador. Before they started using the U.S. money, El Salvador had El Salvadoreños. I don't remember what it was called, but they had their own money.
Colón.
Colón. Right now, what can a Colón buy you? Nothing. It doesn't exist. El Salvador uses the U.S. money. Now, it's still cool to have it. It's an artifact. But this is Confederate money. Was worthless because it was just paper. Nobody needed it. The southward remained backward. Blank-based economy, and the blank section of the nation for decades to come. The South was an agricultural-based society, agricultural-based economy, and the poorest It still is the poorest section of the nation. It still is. Did you know the South is where the poorest is? The radical Republicans tried to have President impeached during the war. This was Andrew, not Andrew Jackson, but Andrew Johnson, John's son. The 14th Amendment guaranteed all citizens, what did it guarantee all citizens? Equal rights. Of course, this was not enforced that well. The Compromise of 1877, this is after the Civil War, ended military occupation of the South. This led to so as soon as the North left, this led to the Jim Crow, which is where a lot of hatred towards African Americans continued. Now, with malice towards none, with charity for all. Who wants to give charity to all? Who's nice? Who wants hatred towards none? Who binds up the nation? Who wants the nation to heal? Who was the speaker? Lincoln. He was a great speaker. And he's talking about the blank period following the war. What is he talking about? He's talking about the Reconstruction. And of course, he didn't get to live to see it because he ended up being assassinated in Ford's Theater. Now, we are going to stop right here. We worked really well. And I hope this video helped.